touch your remote. I'll be right back. All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this very, very special broadcast coming to you, of course, only from ABC Amber Television. It's a privilege to come to you tonight with a subject that I consider very, very important. I want to welcome, first of all, those of you watching from all of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and of course, all of you in Europe, Asia, Canada, South America, and of course, the continental USA. Again, it is always a privilege to come to you with a broadcast that is illuminating and inspiring, especially when it concerns the continent of Africa. Before I take you into the broadcast, I would like you, as usual, for those of you watching by way of Facebook and YouTube, to please go ahead and hit your share button. Go ahead and you hit your share button, and let's populate the platform. I need at the least 700 people in the next 3 minutes. In the next 3 minutes, this is going to be very, very exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, I have with me two very special guests on the side, and we shall be talking some serious issues about Africa-China relations. So please get me started as soon as possible, as soon as you hit your share button. If you are watching by way of Facebook, hit your share button to get me started. Please let me see who is joining right now. Again, go ahead, hit your share button. Let's use the next 3-4 minutes to populate the social media platform to get others in. All right. So let me see who is joining and who is hitting the share button. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please go ahead and hit your share button. Let us quickly populate the social media platform. And while you do that, I'd like to remind you I shall be back here tomorrow with a very, very special presentation on the struggle in Ambazonia. I'd like you to stay tuned, especially those of you watching from Ground Zero. Please stay tuned for that special broadcast tomorrow. So please go ahead, if you are joining, go ahead, hit your share button as soon as you can. Let us populate this platform before I bring the guest to you. I see, who do I find here on the screen? I need my glasses. All right. I see my Indim, so welcome, sir. Thank you. I see Mercy in Joe, Secretary Chris. I ever want to kill you and Dr. Sako. Wait, Mercy in Joe. You know, there is a saying, there's a proverb that you go to the river to take a shower, and a madman follows you there and pick up your dresses and run away with you. You don't leave the river to run after the madman. Then you yourself are mad if you do that. That's what I can say. I will leave him for Ambazonia Bobo. All right? Okay. I see Ghana, Mofi, all the way Australia. Tendong Imba. I see you. Manga Vito. Mbenga Aiche. Please hit your share button, ladies and gentlemen. The moment we hit 700 people, I will bring this program to you proper. All right, I see CBR, ABC Pride of Africa. Thank you. I see also Sama Aloysius, Iron Man, Chris. With you, victory is assured. Thank you, sir. Honor Abu from the great state of California. Carlson Leonga. I see you, sir. You can do better. In that James Fon, I see you. Kevin Brahim. Okay, the numbers are rising. Please, as you join, go ahead and hit your share button. Let us quickly populate this platform. This is an exciting live broadcast. Walter Che, I see you. Arch Succeed, I see you. Atali Dixon, Marie Mary, Julius Nji, Praise, George Dollar. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, again, go ahead and hit your share button, and do not forget the appeal that we have out there to raise funds to support ABC. Please, I am still appealing to you. If you are not yet a registered member of ABC Amber Club, please consider doing so today. Get to the website www.abcambertv.org and sign up to become a privileged member of ABC Amber Club. Your registration can start as low as $5 and can go as high as $150, just depending on what you can afford. So please do so, and let's together pay the bills of this satellite company. We appreciate you for doing so, especially those of you who have already done so. And I also want to remind you of the CID dues, compulsory independence dues. Compulsory independence dues. There is no way we pay for this struggle, we pay for this revolution without Ambassdorians out there paying their dues so that other bills can be paid. So if you have not yet registered at the CID website, the website is www.cid.ambercitizens.com. Again, that website is www.cid.ambercitizens.com. I hope you got that right. So, having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I won't keep my host waiting. I would like to take you into this broadcast proper. Again, always a privilege to come to you with a presentation like this one. And I hope that all of you watching from whatever direction, especially in Africa, will take this message seriously. It is an action-oriented message that we'll bring to you today, and we hope that after watching and listening today, you will go out there and do your part. Not too long ago, the Chinese began descending on Africa for what I would describe as their own share of Africa's wealth or resources. But unlike the Europeans, the first colonialists, I mean those whose policies made Africa the perpetual poor man of the world that it is, the Chinese came promising equity in their dealings with Africa. The Chinese made it very, very clear that theirs wasn't going to be a scramble, or put in another way, a big boy, or small brother relationship, as has been the case with Europeans, the French in particular. They rush in capital equipment overnight, and before anyone could realize it, they had gone for every contract in Africa, be it road construction, hospitals, sporting arenas, schools, and universities and you can name the rest. Why their engineering sector embarked on the contract. Another one, another sector, the mining sector descended on Africa's natural resources. They mine in South Africa, they mine in Angola, Congo Democratic Republic, Kenya, Uganda, French Cameroon, and again, you can go on and name the rest. In the words of P.L.O. Lumumba, China produces everything, however, not in the same quality. They have their products graded into three. Their first-class products go to the first world, whoever divided the world. That is, the Western Europe and America. The second grade goes to Asia and part of the Middle East. And the last grade, what we will call in everyday parlance as junk, goes to Africa. Essentially, Africa is eating the crumbs falling from the Chinese economy. But guess where majority of the raw material used in those products are coming from? They're coming from Africa, of course. Africa has an open door policy for the Chinese. The Chinese in Africa are seen engaged in any economic sector and activity with same level of freedom that the indigenous do. You will think that as promised by China, the same thing holds for Africans in China. No, it is not. It doesn't. It's not the same. In China, there are places that are a no-go for Africans. In China, Africans have to hide to make simple phone calls back home. And even when they do, they must make use of the VPN, virtual private network, to hide their identity so that they are not tracked or caught. Just imagine a Chinese living in Africa and not being allowed to call back home to his family back in China. In China, Africans are not allowed to send money to family. They have to do it clandestinely. Imagine the Chinese in Africa being banned from sending their hard-earned money to family back in China. We have seen official sums in China where Africans are depicted. We have seen museums in China where Africans are depicted as monkeys and apes. China make African countries loans. But you guess what? Chinese loans must be used for Chinese products and services only. That is why a Chinese company gets a contract in Africa but employs no African to work on those contracts. The policy is that all the money must return to China. What China is doing to Africa within a very short span of time, or within a very short span of time, is worse than what Europeans did for centuries. What China is doing to Africa isn't exactly what they promised to do. The equity they promised is nowhere to be seen. But perhaps the bigger problem lies in the fact that nobody, and I mean nobody, not even the African media, is talking or reporting about this. Myself wouldn't be talking about it had it not been for the corona pandemic that came and exposed this and the xenophobia in China against Africans by the Chinese. The world knew from day one, that the virus came out of the virology lab in Wuhan and spread it first in China and then to Europe, America, and Asia, ever before touching Africa. But guess who the Chinese blame or accuse brought the virus into their country? The Africans, of course, in what turned out to be a botched attempt at a cover-up. The Chinese government folded her hands as her citizens went door to door, office to office, and factory to factory, even in hotel rooms, ejecting every African. They were dumped on the streets like waste or garbage. Some severely beaten, kicked around, hacked, and sputtered upon like you will do to smelling garbage. China will not allow them to lodge in any hotel, nor allow them to take the next plane back to Africa. African families who have lived in that country for years and built a life for themselves suddenly, in the twinkle of an eye, lost everything. They were made to give up or surrender, claim over everything that they have worked for. But you may be asking, why do we have to put all the blames on China? And you are right. All this goes on without litigation because of the incapable, sloppy, horrible leadership that Africa is accursed with. Pardon me the language, but that's exactly what it is. Be it in Nigeria, in Gabon, in South Africa, in Ivory Coast, Africans have been cursed with decades upon decades with deplorable leaders. African leaders, for as long as they keep on receiving their special personal favors from the Chinese government, they care less. They care less about the kind of treatment their citizens get in the hands of China. They care less, ladies and gentlemen, about the unfair trade and imbalanced relationship their countries get from China. They care not that their own citizens are being kicked out of China and their life savings and investments confiscated by the Chinese. What is the African Union all about? Why is it not standing up for Africa? The moment has come, I believe, that Africa should start to kick out all Chinese diplomats in the continent until a revision of Africa-China relations is carried out. At the moment, the relationship pact looks like that of a master-servant relationship. We should not fight to take back Africa from Europe, France in particular, only to jump into another contemptible relationship, slavery relationship with China. If something isn't done and now, Africa will only so soon regret it met China. Meagan Seidu, an Australian citizen, one person who from her own little corner took on the Chinese to task, a known African in that matter, was almost ostracized from the social media after her condemnation of the Chinese over African treatment went viral. Take note before you go about venting against the Chinese now. You may be banned from publishing on the social media. The Chinese are not only controlling Africa, they have even a bigger grip over the social media too. And I won't be surprised if this little exposure is denied social media circulation. But Meagan is joining me in the broadcast all the way from Australia, along with her on the set, to review this Africa-China relationship is former AU Ambassador to America, Ms. Chihumbori Arikana. She has been the lone voice out there calling for Africa and African leaders to stand up against such injustices as being perpetuated by China against Africans. It's a privilege to have them here to share to share with us what they believe about this subject. I want to welcome Ms. Meagan and Ms. Arikana to ABC Amber TV. It's a pleasure to have you, ma'am. Good evening.
Good evening. Good to have you as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Meagan, good evening. Can you hear me, please? I cannot hear her, but we will get this right. Meagan, I think I can hear you now. Good evening, is it good morning or good evening in Australia?
It's good morning, but I haven't slept, so we've got with evening.
It's good morning, and I guess it's Friday already in Australia, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Again, thank both of you for joining me here in the broadcast. I will start with Madam Ambassador. You have been in the front line fighting for the emancipation of Africa in the 22nd century, I should say. You are the lone voice out there, seeing what is happening to Africa and talking about it. You witnessed what took place in China recently with the announcement of this corona pandemic. First, the Chinese were trying to put this on Africans in China. What is your take on that, man?
Well, I think it's actually laughable that they would want to blame the Africans for COVID-19. I mean, it's laughable, it's shameful, and the world knows better. I don't even know who came up with the idea of blaming the Africans. It's ridiculous.
Were you able to approach any Chinese officials to ask them what is going on? I mean, we knew from day one that the coronavirus came out from one of the labs in Wuhan. Did you ever have opportunity to speak with any Chinese official about this?
No, I have not. I'm only playing my part as a member of the civil society and voicing on behalf of the many who have reached out to me, also voicing their complaints. No, but I've not spoken to any Chinese official.
But don't you think that it is one of your rules to reach out there, number one, as a spokesperson for Africa and an African Union former ambassador to reach out to the Chinese, at least to maybe the ambassador here in the USA to say, hey, what is going on in China? Africans are being kicked out. They're not only being kicked out, they are receiving physical tortures. I mean, would it hurt to reach out to find out why this is going on?
Well, I don't believe there's an ambassador yet in the Washington office, and I'm not sure what's going on, but the chairperson of the African Union, the only communication I've seen was a tweet from him. And so, again, I know my lane and I know my limits. I am no longer the representative. And so I'm speaking as a civil society. And so as civil society, I've done my part. We drafted an open letter and that went through to the embassy, the Chinese embassy here in Washington, and requested that it be delivered to President Xi Jinping of China. So as civil society, we are doing our part. And that's about the extent of what I am able to do. Now, if President Xi chooses to reply, then fine, we'll see what the reply says. But otherwise, you're quite right. I think the louder voice should be coming from the African Union, and but I understand that the issue is being handled through diplomatic channels by majority of the African heads of states, and even at the African Union level. We're just not privy to the actual conversations that are taking place, but it's my understanding that the issue is being addressed at the highest level.
You mentioned the issue is being addressed by African heads of states. However, there is a general cry out there. I mean, I've listened to Africans in China. I mean, there are videos out there, Africans in China blaming their leaders, that some of them will not as far as acknowledge that Africans were being kicked out, threatened, beaten on the streets of China.
What I can say is I am privy to know some of the steps that have been taken by a few heads of states that I know of. They're pretty positive. I think what you begin to see right now, from what I hear, China now has a hotline number that you can call. The Chinese are encouraged to call if they see any issues pertaining to xenophobia, abuse of anyone, for that matter, particularly Black people. So there's now a toll-free number, it's my understanding, in China, so Chinese can report some of these abuses. I think we need to understand that, like in any society, I do believe we do have significant number of Chinese who are racist. They are not only abusing Africans in China, they've been abusing Africans even on the continent. We saw the video that went viral of a young Chinese man who was blatantly calling the president of Kenya a monkey while he was residing in Kenya. That's how emboldened they can be. Of course, he was deported. I personally think he should have been arrested and let him suffer the consequences of his behavior. We saw the video of that Chinese employer who would routinely whip his employees if they are a few minutes late or whatever minor infractions that they may commit, but there was no need for that. So we've had many stories. This has been going on for a while. So I thank you for shedding light onto this very important issue. But the Chinese need to realize that they need to be good neighbors. There are over 10 million of them. China has a lot to lose if the African leaders were to come together and say, you know what, if you cannot treat Africans properly, then maybe you need to take your Chinese back home as well. So this issue needs to really be addressed at the highest level. As Black people, we are not going to sit down and allow our brothers and sisters, not only in China or anywhere else on earth, we're not taking it lying down anymore. We are going to stand up, we are going to speak up, and we will keep speaking until every African in China and anywhere else on earth is respected. What is happening in China is unacceptable. I understand it's a certain segment of the Chinese population that are extremely racist. We have to speak to it, and it cannot continue. It cannot continue to happen, and we will not have it. That's just all there is to it. Let's send a strong message to President Xi Jinping that the behavior coming out of China from his citizens will not be tolerated by us Black people, and he needs to understand that.
When you say that there is only a segment, when you say there is only a segment of the Chinese population that is engaged in this xenophobia, you will expect that the Chinese government does something or is doing something. I don't think that is actually the case. We have not really seen the Chinese government being proactive to arrest this situation. In their museums in China, you see Africans are put side by side with Chinese, and Africans are referred to as monkeys and apes. I mean, in Chinese museums, how can they be doing something and you still have official museums with Africans depicted as monkeys?
Again, this was all part of last year. I'm speaking to the reaction that I am hearing in terms of the changes on the ground since the outcry pertaining to the recent developments in China. It's only lately, I think it was last week, I hear there's now a hotline that people can call to report these atrocities. But you're quite right. It's unacceptable that it even happened, first and foremost. Even when it was on television, and the museum was authorized to do that. Even the commercial, you remember that commercial where a Black man was thrown in the washer and it turned white? It's just deplorable. It's unacceptable. It should never have happened to begin with. That's why there's an outcry from the Black community and from around the world, really. You're finding that even white people, non-Black people, they're equally outraged. So we must speak to these abuses. And I say, China is one of the 5 members of the UN Security Council. The United Nations is the watchdog for all human rights abuses around the world. So of all countries to be a perpetrator of human rights abuses, China cannot be one of them. But it is what it is, and as civil society, we must keep talking. We must make sure that the Africans who live in China are treated with respect to the same extent that the Chinese who are living in Africa are being treated with respect. That we will not rest until that is accomplished. If it is not accomplished, that we're just not going to take it. We're just not going to take it. If we have to airlift Africans out of China, well, then President Xi Jinping needs to get ready to airlift Chinese out of Africa.
Thank you. Let me turn over to Meagan again, who is joining us from Australia. I think about a week ago, one of your footages which you made after the incident in China went viral. It was all over the place on the social media. However, I have come to learn that Facebook rejected that video from being published on Facebook, but I still found it on a number of platforms on Facebook. But I got reports that Facebook was rejecting that video footage. Meagan, what interest, what took you into Africa? I mean, getting so concerned to put out that message that you put about the Chinese?
Well, my interest in Africa, it's always been there. I can't remember a time in my life where it hasn't been there, and I don't really know how I can fully explain it. But for it to become serious to the point where I sit and make videos and will speak out, my husband is an African. He's a Ghanaian man, which means my father-in-law and my mother-in-law are Ghanaians, and my brothers and my sisters, and all Africans are now my brother and my sister. So if I don't speak and if I don't have a voice, then I'm part of the problem. If you don't do something about it, you are also part of the problem, and I refuse to be part of the problem. So for me, for Africa, Africa is my soul. It's in my heart. I have a daughter. She is half Ghanaian, and Africa is her soul. So it was really important for me to speak out and do something, because I want to take that baby home, and I want her to go home and see Africa. I don't want her to go to Africa and see China.
Tell us, what has been the response that you have gotten from Africans after your video went viral? What has been the response?
It has been crazy. My phone hasn't stopped. It's been mostly positive. 99% of it has been really, really, really positive. There was a couple of political people that posted the video. That one was great to read the comments, because this has now become a political thing. So it was insults backwards and forwards. So
when you say political people, what do you mean?
Politicians and people that are in that political eye that are shared on their platform. So opposing people with opposing views and opposing political ideas, really ripped me apart. So, but I think if you're going to sit in the public eye and make a video like that, you have to be prepared to take the bad and the good. So my favorite is that I have voice messages on my phone in Chinese. I have no idea what they're saying, but that's been my favorite, my favorite thing.
So now, these politicians you're referring to, are they African politicians, Chinese politicians, or Australian politicians?
No, not Australian. I don't know how viral it's gone here in Australia, but I know it's more predominant in Africa. So yes, there was an Africa politician that posted it on their platform. Opposing sides, people with different views, really ripped me apart in the comments. But it's good. They take it on the chin.
So what were these politicians saying to you?
No, they didn't even speak to me. They just posted the video, because a lot of the video was being deleted. So a lot of people downloaded and it was being shared. YouTube, it got deleted from there. People tried to share it across WhatsApp. It got deleted from there. But I think it's been shared so many times that it's quite impossible for them to actually delete it permanently, because it just keeps going. So.
Did you get any response from any Chinese indigent?
Not directly, but as I said, I do have a couple of missed calls and voice messages in Chinese on my phone. So, and they were coming from an Australian mobile phone number, but I didn't recognize the number, so I didn't pick it. But the voice message was in Chinese, so I haven't bothered to get it translated because, quite frankly, I'm not really interested in what they have to say. I knew what I had to say. I thought it was something that was very important. So, regardless of what anybody would tell me, there's not a lot of truth that comes out of China. So even when their diplomats were on TV and confronted with the videos of the violence against Africans, they still sat there and denied that they knew it was happening. And the video footage was in front of them. So I don't care what they have to say at all.
So what moved you? What really concerned you? Tell us how you felt when you saw what was going on in China, which of course was the motivation for the video you made. What was it?
Well, I can't stand injustice and I can't stand racism. And then when you add apathy to that, it set me off. The injustice that the Africans face in Africa alone, let alone outside, and then the racism that they're facing in China, whilst there's 10 million Chinese running around, 10,000 companies that are 90% privately owned in Africa, and they are welcomed there because that is the spirit of the Africa, is to be so welcoming, and yet they are destroying the African citizens in China. Now, if you have an African and you have a business in China, you're also assisting the economy there. How can you throw them out on the street? 12% of the African investment in Africa, the Chinese, investment in Africa is in real estate. And if you look over the past 12 years, and just in the top 10 countries which China invests in, you're looking at $31.85 billion in real estate. So potentially they can kick you out of your homes in Africa too. So, and then I talk about apathy. The Western world shows nothing about, there is not a video on TV or news here in Australia that shows the treatment of the Africans in China. Zero. If not because I have an African husband and I wouldn't have known about it. However, there is a video circulating here across all of the news platforms of a Chinese woman being accosted in the street, and they're calling racism, whilst people are beating the Africans in China, and it's not shown here. That level of apathy just made me so angry. The Western world doesn't show anything that is damaging to an African. You will only see something come out of there if it's a white person that's having a problem in Africa. White South Africans that had a problem, that was spread across the news. But when the whites were taking the land from the blacks in South Africa, you saw nothing. That level of apathy in 2020 disgusts me.
Did the Australian media report on what went on in China over the treatment of Africans?
No, there was not a single report that I've seen personally across all the media and channels, stations here and social media platforms that showed treatment in China. Not a single one.
Thank you. Let me get back to Ambassador Arikana. We have not seen this the same level of outrage that we see from somebody who should not even care about Africa. I mean, I'm referring to Meagan here. We have not seen that level of outrage, even among Africans. What do you think is wrong? I mean, some people have really been mad, but I don't think not to the level that is enough for China to wake up. What do you think Africans need to do?
Well, I have to say, like I always say, we have racist elements of in our populations, in our societies. I live here in the United States. We have racism in this country, but I could not label all white people in America being racist. We have to always understand that there are racist elements within our midst. The same is true of the Chinese. I have some Chinese friends. I had one Chinese lady live with me for about 6 months while she was learning English. She is still my friend to this day. And so we have to be very realistic and address the issues for what they are. There are elements of racism. We can't blanket every Chinese as being a racist.
I was actually referring to
that must be addressed.
I was actually referring to us Africans, that I don't see the level of outrage that everyone should expect from them in view of what happened in China. If somebody who should not even care about Africa is in Australia getting outraged. Where are we Africans?
Well, you also have to understand that, as Africans in general, you could also equally ask the same question and say, where is the outrage about the colonizers? And my favorite one being France taking the 500 billion actual cash out of Africa. Again, back to what the sister is saying, there's a certain level of apathy. We talk about, we're almost put to sleep as Black people. Things that we should be outraged about, we are not outraged about. What is being done to Africa today will not be tolerated anywhere else on earth. It's not just what's going on in China. You can take item after item after item. My favorite one lately is talking about why do we have to fight, for example, to get the remains of our ancestors who were murdered by the colonizers. Why? This is 2020. We are in the 21st century. The Europeans are refusing to give us the evidence of murder that they're not denying that they committed, and we gotta go to court just to get the remains. We gotta go to court just to get our stolen precious artifacts from Europe. So the abuse of Africa has been going on, and I think because there's so much of it, we're almost immune to it, and in some cases we've almost accepted it as normal. That has to change. That has got to change. Because what China is doing, they're just joining the Europeans who've been doing it for a long time. So there is a reason why, that is another reason why we have to come together as Africans, which is why I keep speaking about our unity. What unites us first as Black people is our Blackness. I often say when they shot Mamadou in New York in the 90s, the police shot a Black man. They did not shoot an African. They did not shoot an African American. They did not shoot an Afro-Latino. They shot a Black man. As Black people, no matter where we are, we must understand that what unites us first and foremost, irrespective of where we were born, is our Blackness. So we have to unite. Our strength, our power is in our unity. And that is what the colonizers and the slavers were able to.
Shooting things like the kind of treatment that we saw in China be the anchor of this unity, the trigger of this unity. So the point is, we don't seem to be seeing that happening. That outrage that you should expect from every African, I thought you should see in every corner of the globe. The Blacks standing up and saying, this should never again happen. I don't think we are seeing that in spite of the help that the social media gives us. Or have you?
You're quite right about that. That's why I was saying, if you look at even the things that we are accepting on a daily basis, just the sheer lack of, there's this self-hate among us as Black people, that we are tolerating things that no other race would tolerate. We are abused on a daily basis. It's almost as if we are used to the abuse, that we don't react to it to the extent that we should. Now, I do know that there is a lot of anger among the youth. If you've had some situations, I hope that this does not escalate into violence in any way, shape, or form. But we need to keep speaking. We need to empower each other as Black people, that it is okay to speak up. An injustice to one is an injustice to all. So we need to wake up, and it starts with us realizing that we are a wounded people, that we need healing, that we have been battered to some extent. As in general, as Africans, you could almost say we are suffering from the battered wife syndrome, where we're just, there's no rhyme or reason that we should continue to tolerate what we are tolerating right now. Like I said, look at the part for the continuation of colonization. Why should poor countries be giving all those billions of dollars to France and we're saying nothing? Why should companies that are based in the former colonizers control the economies of African countries. This is happening to this day. You take, for example, the situation going on in Zambia right now. Glencore is a company that owns a couple of mines in Zambia. They've been mining in Zambia for over 20 years. They've never paid taxes. They're underreporting their productivity. When the government starts saying you have got to pay taxes just like everybody else, the average Zambian on the street is paying taxes. Why can't Glencore, the conglomerate, pay taxes? Then how did they respond? They respond by sending 11,000 employees home as a direct way of sabotaging.
But let me ask you, why do you, or why should we blame Glencore? Why don't we blame the African leader who is in charge of that country, who is the one who's supposed to say, hey, every company, every multinational coming to invest in Zambia knows they have to pay taxes, and if they don't, and if they don't pay taxes, they must leave. Why can't we hold rather the leaders responsible for this?
So you have to understand that's precisely what was happening in Zambia. A lot of these presidents, some of them, Zambia is a good example, they're coming to power with the agreements that are pre-existing. A lot of these multinational companies, they have safe havens that they have been using to avoid paying taxes. It's a very complicated situation, and you have to use the law to be able to get out of that those agreements that go back to colonization. So it's easier said than. The government of Zambia has been working with Glencore to try to get them to pay taxes, but they've been playing games.
If you look at Rwanda, for example, I don't think any multinational will do that in Rwanda. I don't think any multinational will do that in Ghana. So when you talk about the way these agreements have been crafted, again, I would still think that the home country is the problem. And when I talk about the home country, I think I am referring to the leadership in that country. Because, Madam Ambassador, when you talk about Africa coming together, Africa reforming, Africa standing up to the West and to the Chinese, it will never happen until there is a change in African leadership, a change in mentality in African leadership. We can beat our skins, our bodies all over the place, but I'm really afraid without a change of mentality in African leadership, nothing will change. Nothing will change. I said in my monologue that the problem is that so long as African leaders are getting their special favors from Chinese leaders and European leaders, they don't care what happens in the country. I mean, is that wrong?
Let me say, you're quite right when you talk about the change in our mentality. But until we have a critical mass of the population, including the leaders, a critical mass that now has the right mentality. When you look at the average African, even you, my brother, when you travel in Africa, you're more likely to be discriminated against by your own people.
That is true.
Black brothers and sisters, simply because our minds are not in the right place. Well, you take somebody, a minister or a CEO of a company, if their mind is still shackled, they go to the boardroom with a shackled mind. The decisions they're going to make on behalf of the people, on behalf of the organization, are going to also be colonized. So yes, you're quite right about that. We need a critical mass of people who understand that first and foremost, their responsibility is to the people. Let's face it, when you look at governance, you have ministers who are supposed to implement the decisions that have been made. If that minister is not awoken, that minister is the one who is going to be the one misrepresenting the people. The permanent secretary is the one who's going to be trying to siphon the funds. A lot of these ministries, the way they are set up, ministers come and go. The permanent secretaries, with my own experiences, A lot of the corruption that you see happening, sometimes it's at the level of the permanent secretaries, because they're the ones that have been in the ministry for the longest time. I'm simply saying, until we have a critical mass of Black people who are awoken, who understand that the decisions they make in the boardroom are supposed to be representative of the people, and that it's not about you, it's about representation, wherein lies our problem. A lot of us, we are still easily manipulated, we are easily infiltrated, we are easily given a few dollars, and we change our minds. I was talking to a friend today about bad drugs for Africa, and I told him, I said, the biggest problem with bad drugs for Africa is at the border, where our people are not inspecting the drugs, and they are being paid to allow the bad drugs to get into the country. Wherein lies our problem. But when we have a critical mass of people who understand that their action, behavior, it affects not only their children, their parents, their relatives, but it affects the whole country. So we need a critical mass of Black people who understand the importance of us being awoken, the importance of us understanding that it's about Africa first, and that we are given leadership roles to represent and not to exploit. We need a critical mass. Sadly, that is yet to come, and wherein lies part of our problem. And even we as citizens, we must own that as well, because we have a role to play when we find ourselves inferior to white people for no good reason whatsoever.
Meagan, if I may turn to you now, you have been married to an African for a while, and I can see your love for Africa. Tell me, what is your perception of African leaders?
Oh, I think they are pocket lining, money hungry, and they are for themselves and they're not for the people, quite frankly. Yeah. You can't have that level of injury. You can't have your own citizens being treated like slaves in your own country. Chinese people, the Chinese have sectioned off parts of Africa, and they have tax-free zones, which are to encourage foreign investment, which is predominantly Chinese. We're talking about a tax-free zone, whilst the common citizen would never be able to have that kind of a tax-free threshold. We have colonial rule that is still left over, the slave-like conditions. We've got money being spent on the most ridiculous things that make absolutely no sense and do nothing for the African economy. We've got, for example, some of the money that China is pushing into Africa. In order to get that money, they are taking thousands and thousands of barrels of crude oil. That crude oil then goes into Chinese Import-Export Bank, which is what they then use to put money into Africa. So if you didn't take that crude oil and give it to them in the first place, you wouldn't need them to give you money because you'd have it. And that's down to the leaders. Regardless policies are in place when you come in, you have a duty of care to your citizens, not your pocket.
Do you see Africans, do you see with your interaction with Africans, do you see them increasingly getting assertive over what is going on in their own home country? Do you see them trying to do something to change their leaders, to change their situation? Now, do you see that happening?
I see a lot of talk, and I see a lot of uprising from this whole awakening movement. But there is no difference from one political leader to the next. It needs to be completely we need new leaders in with new ideas, leaders that are for Africa and not for the pocket. A leader that's not thinking, I have only 8 years, so let me fill my pocket. Who's going to bring in as many of their own relatives, which we have seen in Ghana. So there isn't enough being done to hold those leaders for the decisions that they're making. When you have 10,000 Chinese businesses across Africa, 90% are privately owned, that means 90% of the profit is going back to China. So there is nothing wrong with having Chinese investment and Chinese workers and businesses in Africa, but there needs to be stuff in place. For example, even if you think about the gold. So if you want to come and have your gold mine, no problem, but a percentage of that gold is for us. this percentage of your workforce are going to be African. You will pay them correct wages. So many people's eyes are on China, and the apathy towards Africa means that nobody is looking. Nobody is paying attention. So while they're paying attention to China, and they're, just as an example, because it's not China alone, the child slave laws, the sweatshops and all of those things, the world has been constant on that. But nobody's looking at Africa. So now we have this situation where they can come in, cheap labour, and not pay people for a start.
Right.
When the copper prices went up and China came in their droves,
Right.
and then when the copper price went down, they left. Meanwhile, the African citizens in Ghana in particular are crawling around in an e-waste dump, which Australia is a part of, dumping their e-waste and their computers and microwaves. And you've got children scavenging around an e-waste dump for copper so that they can eat today, whilst China took home millions and billions of dollars worth of copper. That is on the government.
Madam Ambassador, let me ask you a question in regard to this. We have a situation where the Chinese send in, they give African loans. The Chinese give loans to Africa, and those loans must go towards Chinese products, Chinese contracts, Chinese citizens. The indigenous people do not work in those contracts or for the Chinese in those contracts. Everything goes back to China. What are we going to do to change this mentality? Because I don't understand how you can come to my country, get a contract to construct a stadium with a loan coming from your country, and all the employees are from your country, none from my own country. How is it helping us? I don't think even the Europeans do that.
Come to Africa, my son. Actually, to be honest with you, this is not a new thing coming from China. They are doing precisely the same things that when you look at the loans that Africa is getting from the World Bank, these are loans that are being given to Africa and mandated that the equipment, as much as possible, everything that can come from the Western world comes from the Western world. The Chinese are just doing it at a much larger pace that is more visible. Where we again are falling short is us. We need to be better negotiators. I think I was talking at one time with one of my friends who was a staffer at the U.S. Congress, and he was saying, Ambassador, let your ministers and people who are coming to negotiate, they must read the contracts. Say when we go to Africa, we go with our contracts already drawn up, pages where to sign folded, and the Africans, they take those documents and they just sign. You know, they don't read. So, but again, that's somebody who's supposed to be represented. It goes back to us. We did not negotiate well, even with what we have been going through. The average African country is spending over 30% of their GDP in loan repayment to IMF and to World Bank, loans that will never be paid up. We need to be better negotiators. When we are given a bad deal, we must not sign it. But unfortunately, until we have again back to the critical mass, people who understand, we should be making changes. It's my understanding that after the last FOCAC meeting between the African heads of states and President Xi Jinping in 2018, a lot of contracts that were poorly negotiated are being cancelled. A lot of people in government who are representing their various countries are now put on notice to make sure that they pay attention to the contracts that they are recommending to be signed. It all goes back to a leader is as good as the people around them. So to be signed, China should never have been allowed to give a loan, bring all the equipment from China, bring all the employees from China. That should never have happened. And the heads of states are realizing those were badly negotiated. And I know for a fact, a lot of leaders are canceling a lot of the contracts because it was happening at a time when a lot of countries were strapped and were in need of cash. And so some of the contracts may have been signed harshly. But I can tell you that is now changing. China currently, and I know for a fact, China is training thousands of Africans. That was negotiated during FOCAC. China is, they are being trained in China as well as on the continent. Many countries are stipulating that 50% of the employees must be local, and there has to be skills transfer. The people who are responsible for negotiating these deals, they must also negotiate in good faith. China is not going to start pointing out loopholes. It's up to us to point out the loopholes. It's up to us to refuse to sign these bad contracts. So
Who
again,
is
son,
responsible
that's why I
for?
go back. Let me go back to why, in our case, we need the diaspora to get involved. Africa does not have enough capacity, enough expertise to build the Africa we want. The expertise that could also assist the heads of states and government is in the diaspora. So we have to find a way of getting ourselves involved, which is why the organization I registered, African Diaspora Development Institute, is going to do. Organize us, African diaspora, so the African heads of states no longer have a reason to look to China or to look to Europe before they look at their own children in the diaspora. Because what Chinese can do, we have plenty of expertise in the diaspora. We can equally do that. We can build airports with diaspora, with contractors from the diaspora. We can construct roads. Everything that China is doing, we in the diaspora, if we are united, we can do that. The heads of states are looking out to China and Europe because the expertise is just not there in Africa. There's not a single African country today that has the capacity to build a railway line. But when we organize as African diaspora, we can build a railway line. So what is needed is for us, people in the diaspora, to play our part. When we organize and we go to the heads of states and say, you have been talking about the diaspora, here they are. Give us the first right of refusal before you give any contract to any company outside Africa. The onus is on us to organize. So we can't complain.
Don't you think the diaspora has already been doing that enough?
I beg your pardon, honey.
Don't you think the diaspora has already been doing that enough, saying to the leaders in the continent, give us an opportunity to have a say in the contract?
Well, actually, what is, we're doing it in small groups. These contracts are humongous contracts that call for collaboration. No one country can have the expertise. What's happening with diaspora is conversations are taking place on a national level with small groups. What is needed is a conversation at the continental level. That's where you can gather enough engineers to build a railway line. That's where you can gather enough doctors, for example, to make a difference in the healthcare system. I often use that as an example to say, we can complain about how bad healthcare is in Africa. The reality is, if all African doctors are abroad, all African-American doctors, you could include those, were to go back to Africa today, we're only going to meet about 30% of the need. So in order to improve the healthcare situation in Africa, we need to build the capacity. No amount of money put into healthcare with the situation that it is today, that's going to improve healthcare in Africa.
If I may ask, though, who is responsible for building this policy? Is this the AU or individual nations in Africa?
I think now that we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, it is our opportunity. Finally, we have a document that is opening the way, breaking those boundaries and allowing us to trade with each other as a continent. Prior to that, the boundaries that were imposed upon us by the Berlin Conference made it very difficult for a man in Malawi to purchase, with his kwacha, to purchase something from Nigeria in a naira. Now we're opening the borders. The Afrexim Bank is putting in a monetary policy, a digital currency system that a man in Malawi can now pay in a kwacha for his goods that are coming from Nigeria, and the seller in Nigeria will receive his money in naira. So at a continental level, we now have a document that is going to make it easier for the much needed continental decisions to take place. A lot of what needed to be done developmentally, it's very difficult to get the expertise in a small country like Togo or Djibouti or Kenya. You have to look at the Continental. So we need to be able to organize as a continent. But on our end as diaspora, let's start with us, because the Cameroonians alone, there are not enough of them to really make a big impact of the change that Nigeria needs. I use an example of my own country of Ghana to say, President Nana-Addo thought building more hospitals, expanding, renovating new hospitals was the way to address healthcare. Half of those wards are sitting empty, not because there are no patients, but because there are no doctors. The healthcare workers are in the diaspora. There are more doctors in New York than in the city of Ghana. I use another
But this is the problem why we have all these. This is the problem why we have all these professionals in the diaspora. When you have a country in which the youth have no say, the working class has no say, and if they try to say anything, they are picked up and put in detention, put in prisons. You mentioned Cameroon. In Cameroon, you dare not open your mouth and oppose a government policy. And that obtains in most African countries. So when you have a situation where the worker cannot challenge authority about what they are doing, you have them running to the diaspora to look for better opportunities, like you said, which is the reason why they are here. How can they contribute unless these dictatorships are taken care of?
I used Cameroon simply because you happen to be from Cameroon, my son.
No, I'm actually from Ambassdor, Federal Republic of Ambassdor.
Okay, Ambazonia. I just use that as an example because of you. What I can say is, when we discuss issues to do with Africa, I often say, let's be fair. Let's not paint all African heads of states with the same brush. There are many heads of states who are doing quite well for their people. So let's talk about specifics. Let's talk about what is going on in what country, because the challenges of one country are different from the challenges of the other.
The challenges of most countries.
Africa with one brush, we lose focus of the real issues, and we miss out on the much needed conversations.
The priority in most of these individual countries you are referring to is governance. It's governance. So if you don't deal with the wrong people on the wrong positions, all what we are trying to do, we waste our time. Don't you think so? I mean, how long would it take us to get the French out of Africa? We're not getting them out because we've got the wrong people in those places. How long will it take us to get better contracts with the Chinese? It would take forever because we got the wrong people in those places. They get to the Chinese, they get to the French, they take their personal packages, get back home, they enjoy themselves, they don't care what their citizens go through. And should their citizens say anything, they are caught up and put in jail. I think right leadership, Madam Ambassador, I think it should be something we should focus on. Look at Ghana, doing good. Rwanda, doing good. Why? Because of good governance. I think that is Africa's number one problem.
Well, thank you, San, for even pointing out some countries that are doing well, which is why I was saying we cannot just blanket Africa and talk about corruption and people being arrested. We need to talk about issues as they pertain to a particular country or a particular situation, and not paint Africa with one brush. So thank you for pointing that out. Let me also say, when you look at our history, the reason Francophone countries were not discussing the issue of the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization is because our history had shown that any president who tried to go there, they were either assassinated or imprisoned. It was a death sentence. So we have some serious realities that unless these issues are addressed in a tactful manner, we are now moving in a direction that these leaders are going to have cover as they try to move forward and pull away from France. An individual country like Togo trying to pull away from France is mission impossible. However, all of West Africa coming together and speaking with one voice is a much easier battle to fight to pull away from France than if the individual countries are trying to do it on their own. Now the manipulation and the infiltration and the control and the games that are played behind the scenes to keep these West African countries from coming together and have a single monetary policy, that's another issue. You are quite right, my son. By now, we should have at least a single regional currency in most of these, in the 5 African regions. So yes, you're quite right. The conversations need to take place, but wherein comes to where we must understand the games the colonizers have played in Africa for far too long. It's going to take young people like you, my son, to really understand it, to unite in numbers. There are not yet enough of us who get it. When we unite in numbers and we are awoken and we no longer have the shackles of the mind, we can stop the insanity that is going on in Africa today. There's no other way to describe it. The exploitation of Africa that is going on today has got to stop. You look at value addition, something so simple, value addition to our natural resources. It's something that we should automatically do. That is why our youth are unemployed. And yet our money is creating jobs for the Europeans. The young youth in Europe are getting jobs because of Africa's natural resources. What little girls in Europe need is exactly what little girls in Africa also want. So you're right. We need more critical masses. We need more diaspora to go home. Let's join our brothers. Let's be the loudest voice to continue to push for Africa that is free of exploitation, an Africa that is truly independent, and an Africa that can compete on the world stage just like the rest of the big boys. That can only happen when we unite, which is why I'm so glad we have the African Continental Free Trade Area, and I hope that every diaspora can understand it and see it as the completion of what the Pan-African fathers were looking for in 1963. Let's support the African Continental Free Trade Area, and let's organize and plan to play our part in building the Africa we want.
All right, thank you. Let me move over to Meagan. Meagan, if you place good governance and these contracts, fair contracts that we are talking about between Africa and China, Africa and Europe, which one would you choose for a priority, to fix governance or to fix contracts?
It has to fit the people. These things can't be for the governance of the pockets of the people. It can't be, it has to be the people and the nation, and it has to be to the benefit of the country that those contracts are in. The Queen, she mentions the continuation of the colonization pact and the difficulty it is to move away from that.
If I may stop you a little bit there, my question is, you listen to the ambassador putting a lot of emphasis on the need for organization on the ground, the people's organization, but I kind of differ with her. I think the pressure, more pressure should be put on the government, the leaders, to do what is right. But in your position, you have had some experience dealing with Africans. What would you prefer the most first? Is it good governance that then execute good contracts, or you choose to go first with good contracts that maybe bring jobs to the country? What would you go for first?
There's no point in good contract if you have bad governance, because that good contract is supposed to bring revenue to the country. And if you have bad governance, then that revenue isn't going to be used correctly for that country. We first need good governance with good people, surrounded by good people. So not just one part of all of the governance needs to be united in the front and the fight for that particular country. So if you have good governance and then you have good in place, then you have great economy and great resources and everything that is needed, because you've gotten rid of what is corrupt. You've already gotten rid of what is rubbish, and you've brought something good in place, and then they've put something even better in place. So therefore, all of it is for the benefit of the individual countries within the continent.
All right. So you would advise Africans to change their leaders?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And look, I can't, as you said, you can't blanket it and say absolutely every single leader in Africa is corrupt. But we have to also be fair in saying, I mean, if you look at the amount of money that has come in, and I know it seems like we're attacking China, but that's sort of the issue that we're dealing with. So if you look at the amount of money that has come into Africa from China just in the past 12 years, you are looking at $245 billion. So $500 billion. So from between 2006 and 2018, there was $240 billion in loans for infrastructure that's not going to raise any kind of revenue. Then China itself has also invested another $245 billion across, and that's only in the top 10, with the Republic of Congo having 15 million, up to Nigeria, who has, I think, 60 billion. So the amount of money that's coming into the country it's equal to, if you look at $500 billion, is equal to roughly 350 US dollars per citizen across the entire continent of Africa. With that kind of money, we should see some real change. They should be a superpower. They should be an absolute super player and a main player in the game, and not still relying on more loans and more money. Because they have the ability to generate their own. Africa has everything it needs. It doesn't need anything from outside. But if you don't have good governance, then the money that's coming in isn't getting put to good use. Now, Ghana, particularly, as you mentioned, is a country that's doing really well, but they're not doing well enough. And it may be controversial to say, but when you have government spending $9-point-something million to relocate a passport office to build a cathedral worth millions and hundreds of millions of dollars, whilst you don't even have a psychiatric center. Your hospitals have got rot and wood. You've got people seeking out prayer camps rather than hospitals, because the standard of the hospital care, healthcare, is just substandard. So without good governance, all of these billions of dollars mean nothing. A great contract is nothing without good governance, so that the money that's being raised, the revenue, will go back to the continent and the country.
Well, thank you. I hope that we are getting something out of there. Let me return to the ambassador. I know that, if I may tell you a story,
may I
Madam Ambassador.
What the sister just said? May I comment to what
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, so it's not a simple situation of saying we need good governance, then we're going to look for good people. Everything can happen. It needs to happen in tandem. First of all, we have to prioritize on our issues. Let me give an example of how the figures that she just pointed out, in terms of the funds that have come in, loans from China over the past 12 years. Combined, you're looking at about 500 billion. May I remind her that France alone is taking over 500 billion a year, not 12 years. African Union has estimated that in order to completely build out the African infrastructure, we are going to need about $100 billion a year for the next 10 years. If that were to be available, that's only 2 years takings from France. So let's be realistic. It's not just China. Our problems are to do with the colonizers, and China is just becoming yet another colonizer. We must look at our problems from a global point of view and make sure that we have the right people qualified to do the job. I cannot ever emphasize enough that the capacity Africa needs is in the diaspora. Let's make no mistake about that.
You are perfectly right about that. You are very correct. You are very correct about that. But let me tell you something about France, which, of course, it won't surprise you. I had a guest who was supposed to join us in this broadcast, but because of where he works, he was instructed, if this conversation would have anything to do with France, we will not allow you to participate in the discussion. And so he had to bow out. But the French lobby is very, very strong. If anybody thinks that the French are giving up on Africa anytime soon, as they want the rest of us to believe, That is a lie. It is not going to happen anytime soon. But I'm going to ask you, between the French and the Chinese, who are our lesser enemies? Madam Ambassador, both of you can take the question.
Well, to be honest with you, I think it is my humble opinion that if you were to talk about France and China as roots of a tree, the roots of France are so embedded, this tree is going to be impossible to shake. Whereas the roots of China, we can shake them. China hasn't been as embedded in Africa, and their roots are not as deep-rooted as the French roots. So I think there is a possibility, good possibility, that we can continue to negotiate with China and make sure that they do the right thing. France, we also have a chance to negotiate with France because President Macron is a young man, he is progressive. I think we have a better chance of seeing some movement with Macron in power. We don't know who else is going to come behind him. But so what's needed really is for us to really just stand up and have our leadership look France and China in the face to say, what you are doing is wrong and you need to stop. We will not tolerate it anymore. So we need to stand up and just push back because we are the victims and they are the perpetrators. Ours is an easy fight because we are coming from the point of righteousness. They are the bad guys and we need to stop them. Like I often say, we can no longer allow them to punch us and we give another kick. We can no longer allow them to punch us and then we have to apologize for them punching us. No, they are the perpetrators. We must hold them accountable, and that can only happen when we are awoken and we are no longer afraid of them because they are just as equal to us as we are to them. We need to have a critical mass that is awoken, that is ready to say, enough is enough. France, you can no longer continue to colonize us. The rest of the colonizers, we know what you have been doing to us, but we must be strong enough and fearless enough to push back and tell them enough is enough.
What is Meagan's take on this? Do you think the French or the Chinese are lesser enemies in Africa?
Oh, I think Queen Arikana has just said it all, truly and honestly. The reason everything is so focused on China right now is purely because of the coronavirus, this COVID-19. But the French, the roots are very, 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 very deep there. And when we talk about the continuation of the colonization pact, part of that limits your military alliance to France. So even if you wanted to fight back, you will align with who? So as I said, we need unity, and with unity, we can push France out. As far as China is concerned, China are silent assassins. They start with one, next thing you know, there's 10 million of them. What this COVID-19 has brought awareness to that. Now, do we need to be fighting two evils, or we can get one that's easy to get rid of now, which is going to be China, so we can focus on getting France out of Africa? It makes no sense. Countries in Africa speak French. You're not from France. You're not French. We need African dialect, African language, African money in Africa. So that $500 billion, that is, as she said, yearly. How ridiculous that goes to France. And the only reason France continues to do what it does is because it will collapse without that money. So France is the devil. And
France is the devil. I think you are in agreement there with Ambassador Arikana that France is the biggest devil here.
But with unity, we can deal with it. With unity, we can absolutely get rid of it. If the entire nation stands up, who are they going to come and assassinate? Nobody's coming to assassinate anybody if all of Africa stands together and says, try it. They won't try.
All right. Please, it seems the Ambassador had something to add there.
No, I was going to only say, amen, my sister, amen.
Thank you, Queen.
All right. Please, ladies, if you can sit there for a second for a commercial moment. When we come back, I would like to open the phone lines for a few questions from the audience, and have their take on what they have to offer or say about this subject that we are discussing here. So please stay tuned. Don't touch your remote.
Start a new career as a Linux system administrator with an average salary of $80,000 to $120,000 a year. Dynamic Tech Academy has transformed many lives for the better through our 6-month Linux program. We are so excited to announce that we are adding DevOps course and Red Hat certification at no charge, which will make students more competitive. Over 80% of our students have no prior IT background, yet the vast majority of alumni land jobs in 3 to 6 months after they start applying. Our ultimate goal is to reach 100% student employment, so we work with every student until he or she gets a job. Upon successful completion of the course, we will provide resume building, interview preparation, and job placement assistance. With the Linux course, you get more than 300 hours of in-depth training, and you get to learn from experienced instructors. By the end of the program, our students can be Red Hat certified if they choose. Our alumni work in companies, both government and private companies in the USA, Canada, and even Europe. Want to learn more about the program? You can contact us at info@dynamicdmv.com, or you can call us at 240-604-9505, or you can call us at 240-423-7865. And you can also visit us at www.dynamictechdmv.com. If you are interested in online classes, please register on our website. That's once again www.dynamictechdmv.com.
You need a financial instrument that provides a hedge against inflation, 100% guarantees that you will not lose your money, has tax-free growth and distribution, the ability to take an interest-free loan, avoids probate, provides creditor protection, guarantees your family that your income will be replaced should you die, helps you protect yourself financially against chronic, critical, and terminal illness, and of course allows you to take money anytime for any reason at any age without a tax penalty. You need only as little as $50 to invest per month. Contact Irene Fombo. Tel 513-5014-177 or send an email to irenenpmsn@gmail.com.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I am having with me here in the studio or on set two very, very well informed Africans who know what it will take to change Africa for the better. Again, want to welcome Ambassador Arikana. Ambassador, before we get to the cause, one last question. You talked so much about the need for Africans to come together. There are lots and lots of Africans in pain. And I will quote you the example of Southern Cameroon, where you have people are killed on a daily basis by the regime in Cameroon. There are over 700,000 internally displaced persons, according to United Nations own statistics. There are over 80,000 refugees out there in Nigeria, and over 3,000 settlements have been burnt down by the regime in Cameroon. I have not heard you say anything to humanitarian situations like this one. How do you think people who are going through such pain listen to your message and accept it, if you can't talk about a humanitarian situation?
Well, to be honest with you, I would say a good significant percentage of the African population is going through some serious humanitarian issues. Right next door in DR, I've seen horrific videos of what is going on. You look at the Sahel nations, a lot of carnage, a lot of people getting killed. In a nutshell, the continent is under siege. And when you look at it and say, where do we begin to address these issues? Like I said, each country has different challenges, but in a nutshell, when it's all said and done, make no mistake about it, the continent is under siege. And what needs to be done is for us to look at Africa from a global continental point of view. And when it's all said and done, the majority of the countries that are having issues, they are former French colonies. So let's look and say, where is the root cause of these issues? And that's really what we need to talk about. And that's what we were talking about earlier, to say Cameroon alone is not going to be able to fight France. Individual countries cannot fight France. You understand the geopolitics probably better than I do of Cameroon. And you know what needs to happen if Cameroon is to be, and in your case, Ambassdor is going to be completely free. So it's not a simple matter. It's a multifactorial issue, but let's face it, Africa is under siege. There is no question about it. The carnage that is going on in too many African countries should not be tolerated. And it is only happening because we are small economies that are easy to exploit. When we are united, like my young daughter there just said, that they can mess with us if we're fighting individually. But if we all came together, it's easier for us to win the fight than if each individual country is fighting on their own. So yes, my heart bleeds when it comes to what is going on in Cameroon, in Ambassdor, in what's happening in DRC, in Somalia, Djibouti, the Sahel regions. It's just sad. The continent is under siege. That's why there is a need for a continental approach to Africa's problems. We need a continental army. We need a single African currency. We need an African central bank. We need our own monetary policy. We need an African stock exchange. Those are things that should have been done a long time ago.
The
We're going to
problem,
be able to neutralize a lot of this, but it's because we were divided. Why it took us 56 years to come up with the African Continental Free Trade Area. Again, those are some of the things that you can't help but just say, we're just stupid, because this is a no-brainer. It should have been done a long time ago, but that is our reality. This is where we are. It is what it is. But those to whom much is given, much is expected. That's me and you. Let's realize that we need to also play our part in what goes on the continent. We cannot sit from 10,000 miles away and complain when we can't even unite ourselves as Africans living in the same neighborhood. We need to realize that the change that we desire starts with me having a serious conversation with the image in the mirror and realizing that to a great extent, I'm suffering from the legacy of colonization, and that I need to unshackle my mind. And first and foremost, I must step out and unite with my brothers and sisters, because united, we could deal with the situation in Cameroon if we are united. Cameroon alone is not going to be able to push back against France. My brother, you know that as much as I do.
the problem of Cameroon, yes, is partly the French, But it is more than that, considering that the French really don't have anything to do with the relationship between Ambassdor and French Cameroon. I think the problem that is in Cameroon is the inability of those who run the country to listen to the people like we have in every other country. So it has resulted to where we are today, a conflict that has gone on for 4 years. And when you talk about approaching this from the African angle, we don't have an African angle. The AU does nothing. The international community, they do nothing either. Well, they try, I would say they try, but Africans, the AU does absolutely nothing. The AU looks like a lobby for these individual leaders. That is the African problem. If the AU was serious, they would have waded into what is going on in Cameroon to say, hey, you can't keep killing the people, burning their settlements, driving them into the bushes, sending them into refugee camps. The African Union has not done so.
Again, your point is well taken. The issues of Africa, you would hope that the AU as a continental body, could have some say. The problem with AU is that it does not have sovereignty. The African Union Charter clearly states that the African Union cannot interfere with the affairs of the state. So they can only come in as negotiators. They can try and coerce the leadership, but AU does not have sovereignty and does not have the right to dictate what a nation can do. Remember, the membership membership to the African Union is voluntary. A leader can just decide, I no longer want to be part of the AU, and they can pull out, and then there's nothing you can do. Now they're completely on their own with no ability of engaging them in any conversation in any way, shape, or form. So we must understand also how the AU was set up. What really needs to happen, conversations need to come in where the AU can also have sovereignty. AU must be given more powers. We have a lot of good organs that should be ratified in the African Union Parliament, for example. The African Court, the African Court, we need to have those organs to be ratified so they can begin to play their role. But to date, they have not yet been ratified. What is delaying the process, I do not know. But I can tell you one thing. If we were to fight from the continental level, the battle would be a lot easier. But as long as we're fighting, it's like a hand fighting with one finger instead of fighting with the whole fist. That is where our problems lie. That's why I keep saying the Berlin Conference is alive and well today, because as little bitty countries, we are constantly chasing our tails. And yes, my brother, the situation in Cameroon, it is, my heart bleeds.
All right, thank you. We will get the phones open now and take a few questions before I let you go, maybe one or two. I think I got the first caller here. Hello, sir.
Chris?
Yes, good.
I want to thank our Madam Ambassador that she spoke too well, and I think my only I want her now.
May I know where you are calling? May I know where you are calling from, sir?
Hello.
May I know where you are calling from, please?
Yeah, I'm calling from Sweden.
All right, thank you. Go ahead with a question.
Yeah, I want to ask Madam Ambassador that if she was the head of the Organization of African Unity, because maybe these leaders don't know the agenda to draw during their meetings or what to talk on. So if she was the head of the Organization of African Unity, if she was to chair a meeting of all these presidents, can she draw us a program on what to talk to? Maybe most of these African leaders can also hear and learn and know the topics to talk on. Thank you.
But she doesn't have the powers to draw the agenda. She's no longer there.
It's just like a proposal, an idea, that if she was the head.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Madam Ambassador, please.
Something from that. Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
That's a hypothetical question. You have to understand that the African Union Commission chair, their main responsibility is to implement the decisions as agreed upon by the African heads of states. The heads of states, they meet, and when they leave Addis, which is where the headquarters of the African Union is, they go back to their countries and they're boggled down with their day-to-day issues of running their country. The chair of the African Union Commission is the one who's supposed to run around, come behind them, and make sure that what they have agreed upon is implemented. That also is a big challenge for the African Union. A lot of decisions are approved, but we lack implementation. The African Continental Free Trade Area, for example, it is a perfect example of how the chair could really make a difference by making sure that everybody is pulled in that needs to be pulled in. Let's make no mistake about it. The African Continental Free Trade Area is not going to succeed unless the African diaspora are a significant part of the implementation process. Otherwise, we are opening Africa up for others to come in. The Chinese are already there because of the African Continental Free Trade Area. They're getting ready to quadruple their presence because now they can establish themselves in one country and spread like wildfire throughout the continent because the boundaries that have been slowing them are now opened up. The Europeans are already present. They're getting ready to quadruple their presence. So because Africa does not have the capacity is in the diaspora. So if I were to be chair, I would be going completely crazy, running around Europe, running around the United States and everywhere the diaspora are, and making sure that we create an environment that makes it easy for the diaspora to come and participate in the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The diaspora have the expertise, and the diaspora, when we pull our funds together, we have the funding. We don't need anything from anybody. 1 million African diaspora with $1,000, that's $1 billion, my brothers and sisters. Now let's make it 5 million. There's almost 400 million African diaspora. Let's just take 5 or 10 million with $1,000 a year. That's 5 to 10 billion year in and year out. You can see how quickly we can build the wealth and build the Africa we want, a sustainable Africa that is not going to be extractive like the Chinese do. They're simply extracting out of Africa. The Europeans, they have been extracting out of Africa for centuries. So the sustainability that Africa needs can only be brought by the African diaspora. So if I were to be chair, I would make that priority number 1 to bring in the missing link. If Africa is to move forward, the missing link today are its children in the diaspora with their funds and their expertise.
All right, that sounds like a little campaign speech there, right? Okay, let's get the next caller here. Hello.
Hello.
Yes, sir. Where are you calling from, please?
Yeah, I am calling from the Philippines.
Okay, thanks for calling. What is your question or contribution, please?
Yeah, I want to first of all thank you, Secretary Chris, for bringing this kind of wonderful people to our Amber TV. And my question goes to Madam Ambassador. She has been advocating for a change in Africa, the mentalities of Africans. And she spoke of France getting 500 billion CFA, $500 billion from Africa every year. And my question goes to Madam Ambassador. Has there been any African leader who has called you to encourage you to continue advocating for that stop for France doing this? And to Madam Meagan, she spoke of the Western media never saying anything that concerned Africa, because there was one time I saw a snake fell from the ceiling in China and it was broadcast in CNN. Somebody driving and got drunk hit an electric pole in Shanghai. It was shown on CNN. But Africans are being treated like animals, like whatever we can describe it. But no Western TV from BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, nobody has spoken about it. I really want to know, what are these media taking Africans for? I don't know whether they have any idea to support. Thank you. That's my
Thank
question.
you. Thank you. That's a great question. I will let them answer you. Let me start with Meagan before we get to the ambassador. Meagan, please go on. It
Now, all those years ago, when people who looked like me came to your continent, we came there to divide in order to conquer. So if we start playing all of these atrocities that are happening to the black woman and the black child in Africa, you will get people with their heartstrings pulled who will try and make a difference. As far as we don't report anything, apathy will exist in the media, and you guys will continue to kill yourself, thereby doing the job that we started when we first came there. So the media will not report it because they don't want, the powers that be do not want we to be involved in stopping that. We came there to divide and conquer, and you guys are continuing to conquer yourselves for the original colonizers and enslavers. So you'll see it on Western media. You will not. The only thing is when a white woman goes missing. We have the Takrati girls in. There was nothing, not a single blip in the media of those women that were killed. But one or two American women, I believe it was, went missing, and it was health-wise, and they were found within a week. That's the level of apathy that we're looking at, and it's ridiculous. It's time that it stops, which is why I made my view in the first place. We came there to divide and conquer, and you guys are continuing to conquer yourself with that self-hate and the doctrines. When you try to travel abroad to get your education, you come and study African history taught to you by a white person. That makes no sense. You go home with these brainwashed ideas, and it just continues. It won't be reported here because the media here and the powers that be and government do not want people to rise up and fight for Africa because we want Africa.
And I could chime in on that as well. And I'm adding on to the issue of being brainwashed. When you look at even our own media in Africa, they should be reporting our stories. We don't report our stories either. And it goes back to the same brainwashing, which again gets me to say, when it's all said and done, Africa's problems boil down to each and every one of us as Africans. We do some of the dumbest things as Africans. We must wake up and smell the coffee. We must wake up and defend our Africa. What is not tolerable in the West should never be tolerated in Africa either. And yet, when the bad news are reported in the West, we look at them differently. When the same happens in Africa, we look at it differently. We need to be our own advocates. Our own media must also highlight all the good news coming out of Africa. I use an example of the African Continental Free Trade Area. When the European Union was being created, we were being fed news blow by blow for years before it happened. And when it happened, it was all day long talking about the European Union, what they were doing, what's getting ready to happen. Everybody knew about the European Union coming. Does anybody even know? What percentage of Africans even know about the African Continental Free Trade Area? What are we doing to promote our Africa? This is a monumental decision in the history of the continent. I was in Ethiopia when the African Continental Free Trade Area became in force. I waited until midnight to see if there was going to be any fanfare when the AFCFTA went into force. No fanfare. I switched from one television to the other. There was nothing. When the heads of states launched the African Continental Free Trade Area, I was in Niamey, Niger. Same thing. I went to my hotel room. I was scanning televisions, looking for news about the African Continental Free Trade Area having been launched. Nothing. Where are our news media? Why aren't they picking up this issue and discussing it? Even now, we are looking at official implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. We should be having media talking about it, talking about our history, how we got here, why this is a monumental decision that must be celebrated by every African, why every African should be looking at saying the most amazing continent is finally getting it right. That the continent that is where the rest of the world is looking to is getting ready to open its borders wide open, that we, the children of Africa, must be on the driver's seat of this agenda. It is a new deal in Africa. We must be part of it. Nothing. The people who have no business knowing about the African Continental Free Trade Area, they're the ones who know about the AFCFTA. I'm talking about the Europeans and the Chinese. The children of Africa who must know about the AFCFTA don't even understand it. So Wareen goes back to what my daughter here said, that it is about our minds. It's about the brainwashing. We must wake up and realize that we're suffering from this affliction, and that it's only when we rise up that Africa can change.
Madam Ambassador, the caller also wanted to know if you are hearing from any African leaders who are saying to you, we like what you do, keep on.
Very much so. I remember one day I was I just checked into a hotel, and my phone rang. I won't mention which president, but it was the first lady of a country. They just finished watching my video, and she said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad we got you. My husband and myself are your biggest fans. We've watched every one of your videos." So yes, I've heard from several of them.
All right, wonderful. Let's get the last caller before we call it a day. Hello. 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 Please, can you turn down the volume of your set and focus on the phone, please?
I have.
All right, go on, please. Where are you calling from?
I have. I'm calling from the United States, precisely Maryland.
Okay, what is your question or contribution, sir?
I really don't have a question. I just want to affirm with something that I'll call her Mommy Carrie now. She said something like, our problem in Africa is with us. I really affirm with her on that point. And there is one thing that us Africans from the diaspora, we can sometimes, our own people, when I say our own people, I don't only mean like our leaders, us like our family relatives and mere Africans, they don't really accept us when we go back home to try to make a change. When we go back home with some kind of a knowledge to to do something with them, to work with them, they look at us like we are foreigners. Most of the time, they only expect us to come back with money. So when we go back home, try to establish back home, they look at us like we're strangers. They say, carry down an American thing. I would say that in Pidgin, take down an American idea and take it back there. So these are, sometimes it's our own people that are really hindering us to establish back or to educate them back there in Africa. So I'm just, for instance, okay, I went to Africa and I bought a mango juice. This mango juice was produced where? In Dubai. I was so pissed off, and I spilled it on the floor, and they were looking at me like, you want to show them money, you want to show us that you have a lot of money in America. Why do you do that? I said, I'm so pissed off because this is just 20% juice, and it's produced in Dubai. Dubai don't have a single mango plant. How could we be importing mango juice from Africa? So I just want to say that Africans, we should learn, we should understand that most of the time we should not bring back material goods from the West. We could come back with knowledge, like our doctors, our engineers. When they go back home, they are not treated sometimes like they are not really welcome. That's just all. That's just what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you for the call. I will let Madam Ambassador add something to that if she can.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the caller is absolutely correct. Thank you, San, for bringing that point. And that's again where I would say, if we were to be organized as African diaspora, I'm going to use the coffee growers out of East Africa. I was in one of the West African countries, and during breakfast, there were these little sachets of instant coffee. They were from Switzerland. You know very well that's West African coffee. Why is it that we, the diaspora, could come together and organize those coffee growers in Africa? What they're being paid for their coffee beans to get out of East Africa, is kittens because they have no market. You tell me why we diaspora, there are about almost 10 million continental Africans. With the African Americans, you're looking at about 50 million of us. Why are we still drinking Lipton tea? Why, when we have the best teas out of East Africa? Why do we have Folgers coffee in our kitchen cabinets when we could be drinking the best coffees in the world coming out of East Africa? But we are not organized enough. We could unite and come up with cooperatives back in East Africa. Let's begin to be the market for these women and men who are working long hours to get pittance. But it's because we are not organized. Let's start thinking Africa. Let's start thinking keeping our dollars in our own communities. The organization that I have established, African Diaspora Development Institute, go and sign up, OURADDI.org, OURADDI.org. The plan is to pull all of us together so we can begin to post these opportunities that we can come together and pool our monies and invest. We can change that narrative. So as long as we are not united, we will continue to have African products taken out of Africa, relabeled as coming from Switzerland when it's actually African coffee and tea. The same is happening with many other products. Flowers out of East Africa, they go to Belgium, they're relabeled, now they're coming from Belgium. Africa is being exploited like you can never even imagine. We can stop it when we unite. And I can tell you through ADDI, our plan is to go to the heads of states as a united front and let them know that the diaspora are coming home and that we are united, ready, willing, and able.
All right. Thank you, Madam Ambassador. Meagan, you have a last word to add to that.
Oh, look, she is absolutely correct, and so is the caller. This is something that my husband faces every single time he goes home. So the treatment is that he's gone abroad, so he thinks he is better than, he has more knowledge than. But the fact of the matter is the amount of stuff that is being imported into Africa it's unneeded. They export it, relabel it as the Queen has said, and then it's brought back into Africa and sold to you at exorbitant prices. If we have unity in the East Africa where they are producing the coffees and the teas, if we have unity in the cocoa farmers, if they come together and say, you know what, I'm not letting you take my cocoa and give you cents a kilo and then sell it outside for billions and billions of dollars. If they build factories in Africa that can produce chocolate, the amount of money that would be coming into the country. We've got China importing plastic rice while we grow rice in Ghana. You've got Chinese farmers growing rice in Ghana and importing plastic rice to Africa, and plastic fish and half quality products, stuff that they won't consume themselves. Now, the fish market is, we've got the third biggest business in Africa, and yet we're importing fish that is swimming in sewage from China. This is the sort of stuff that the country and the people need to come together and say, Africa produce for Africa, from Africa. No more of this imported rubbish that they take what is good and they send us what is not good. That has to stop, because not only is that hurting the economy, but it is hurting the health of the people. And that is part of the agenda. This toxic stuff that is coming into the country from outside, whilst Africa has the ability to grow everything that it possibly needs. They don't need to import anything. There is no need to import anything. We've got even the presidents, the leaders are importing cars. Well, if you've got Continental in Ghana particularly, making Ghana-made cars, there's no reason for that amount of expenditure to even occur. So all this import is ridiculous when Africa has everything it needs right here. We should be exporting it at top dollar to the outside world. If we stop exporting it to cocoa to Switzerland for them to make chocolate, to sell worldwide, if we make it in Africa, we can sell it and we can make billions of dollars instead of Switzerland making billions of dollars off our farmers who are killing themselves in the cocoa fields. Drying the cocoa, and then we're not talking about machines, we're talking about workers, individual farmers that are killing themselves so that Switzerland can make billions of dollars off chocolate. That makes no sense. So if we unite, if the cocoa farmers unite and the coffee growers unite, then we can fight the system of getting paid pennies while the government sells extraordinary prices outside so they can import the rubbish.
Thank you. Thank you. The point you are making, that is the same point I made mention in my monologue of the kind of products that leave China for Africa. 3 types of products. You have the first grade, the second grade, the third grade. The first and second grade, they go to the USA, to Western Europe. Second grade to Asia, the Middle East. And the last grade, the chaff, the junk of it, goes to Africa.
Can I jump in really? Because it's not just foodstuffs. We have here in Australia, this is a jumping left field, but even vehicles, okay? Here I can purchase a vehicle nationwide. I cannot register and drive on the road because it has legally been written off. But I can put it in a container. It's written off for a reason because it is a death trap, it is unsafe. But I can put it in a container and ship it to Africa and someone will buy it and drive it on the road. That's the sort of thing that people need to start waking up to and stop that sort of thing happening. The West has to stop polluting Africa. It has to stop.
Thank you, Meagan. I believe you have an ally in Ambassador Arikana, and we will continue this discussion.
She is a fan in me because I've watched all her videos too. So
oh,
sometimes
wonderful.
when I sit down and make a video, it's because I've watched something she's had to say and I've managed to get some knowledge and fire. So wonderful. I thank the Queen for everything she is doing. I'm really honoured to be sitting here with her today.
All right, I will give Madam Ambassador the last word.
Meagan, thank you so very much. It was so refreshing listening to your video and your passion. I think that you will go a long way in also sharing the message with those who look like you. I often say we as Black people, we are in the intensive care and we need healing. We are a wounded people. But I also say the same is true for white people, those particularly those who are racist. They too are in the intensive care and they need healing. So the message coming from you, speaking your truth, is also going a long way, not only helping the Africans understand ourselves, but especially those who look like you to also understand what's going on and why they must do the right thing. But together, as a united humanity, because this world is ours, and we are here to share it. We are not saying we don't want foreign direct investments in Africa. No, Africa is the origin of humanity. Africa can feed the entire world. Africa can house the entire world. Regardless of your skin color, you are welcome to our Africa. That's who we are. You see, being African is a spirit. And until you have that spirit, you'll never quite understand how giving and loving Africa is. So Africa belongs to the world. We're simply asking that those who come to Africa from the faraway lands, they treat Africa with respect, that they do what is right, what is just, what is fair by the Africans. And the exploitation of Africa can no longer continue. And we, as a united African children, we are going to defend our turf viciously. We are simply asking the world to be fair to Africa. So Meagan, thank you, my sister, for being on the platform. Equally honored to be with you. And by the way, we are sisters because we are both Ghanaians by marriage. We have two proud Ghanaian wives.
Madase. Thank you.
Madase.
Okay. All right. That was wonderful. It was, again, a privilege to have Madame Ambassador and you, Meagan. It was great to know you and have you on ABC. For all the listeners out there, if you are in Africa, we want you to know you can locate ABC Amba TV on your satellite channel. I don't know what channel it is in Ghana, in Nigeria, in South Africa, but I know for sure it is there. We are all over all of sub-Saharan Africa. That is all of Africa with the exception of Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Egypt. Besides these four, ABC is watched live through satellite in all of Africa. Again, I want to thank you all for tuning in, and for my guests, thank you for coming. God bless you all.
God bless you too, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.
God bless you too. Always best. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was it for the day. I want to remind you, tomorrow we're gonna be back here. We're gonna be back here tomorrow, so please stay tuned. I got a very, very important presentation that I got to do tomorrow. So I'm inviting all of you, tune back same time tomorrow for that special presentation. That said, again, thanks for tuning in.
You need a financial instrument that provides a hedge against inflation, 100% guarantees that you will not lose your money, has tax-free growth and distribution, the ability to take an interest-free loan, avoids probate, provides creditor protection, guarantees your family that your income